I'd been doing construction most of my life. I was never really good at waiting tables or doing retail, the other things that people do while they're in high school or in college. Never really very good at that. And so I turned to construction. We were talking about building a school. He was like, and I was going to do it out of cinder block, totally conventional materials. And my buddy was like, hey, have you ever heard of building with trash? I was like, never heard of building with trash. Let's give it a shot. So we got the book out, put the first tire on the ground, packed that tire out, put another one down, then another one down. Pretty soon we had an entire structure.
What do you think about these trash bottles? We could fill this with plastic.
Look at this. Look at this. We can have a lot of insulation with
We need insulation, and the styrofoam is our principal source of insulation in the roof. With what we have here, we could build an entire house, seems like.
As we were building the campus, we saw that there were a lot of lessons to be taught while building the campus. There was a lot of subject matter that you could draw out of the construction process, especially math, right? There's a lot of math in construction.
Yeah.
So what we started doing was integrating the math because we finally did build the school, and we needed subject matter that was better than the, rote memorization-based state-mandated curriculum. And so we were like, okay, instead of doing abstract math, why don't we do the math to build a ventilated stove for a family in the village, right? They started using their geometry classes to measure out what was needed for the stove. And then in art class, instead of doing something that would go on the refrigerator and get thrown away, we were they're modeling with clay the stove itself. Then in budget class, they started doing the budget for the stove. Then we turned that into water tanks because there's a lot of math and science, a lot of the STEM concepts in water tanks and compost latrines and houses and arches and domes. So we could see as we were building that this was a great medium to engage students and, turn school into fun, because I think our students really enjoy taking what they've learned in the classroom and doing something with it.
Welcome back to Constructive. This is one I've been looking forward to since I met Matt. Just want to rehash why I started this podcast, because it just really correlates a lot to why I'm excited to talk to Matt. And it's called Constructive. It's about how we use construction to help the world. Constructive criticism is stuff that's hard to hear but helpful. Construction is an industry full of a lot of conflict, but I'm trying to figure out a way to help the world with it. And Matt is doing some amazing things in that vein. And I just want you to introduce yourself. I know you've done a lot of work in Guatemala. We're going to get into all of it, but I think it kind of started in the Peace Corps many years ago. Is that true? Talk to me about that.
That's it. That's true. Great to be here today with you. Thanks for the opportunity. And I joined the Peace Corps in 2002 and moved to Guatemala and met the co-founder. We were the two people in the Peace Corps with the worst Spanish. And so we were in the same classes together and got to know each other pretty well. And we ended up spending the next 20 years together building in Guatemala.
Cool. What did you find in Guatemala that made you want to stay?
Great question. Really, as far as I'd been doing construction most of my life. I was never really good at waiting tables or doing retail, the other things that people do while they're in high school or in college. Never really very good at that. And so I turned to construction. And my favorite thing about doing construction there was working with the Guatemalan builders. These are some tough guys, right? They could show up to work without shoes, never complain. They could eat 2 tortillas with a little bit of salt for lunch, never complain. They were tough and rough and ready to figure things out. And because we were doing green building and it took a lot of adapting, they knew how to source materials. They knew how to get rough and tough and work with a sledgehammer for 8-10 hours a day and have fun doing it. And I love doing that with those guys.
I think it's interesting. Let's get into the logistics of what Long Way Home is, because I think stuff is going to flesh out from there. But just tell me the basics. I know you explained to me the part I'm most excited about is you're using construction to build schools and then teach kids construction. I mean, I'm probably simplifying it, but flesh that out for me.
Sure. So whenever you do green building, we first started off with Earthship Volume 1. We got that book out, and my buddy was like, we were talking about building a school. He was like, and I was going to do it out of cinder block, totally conventional materials. And my buddy was like, hey, have you ever heard of building with trash? I was like, never heard of building with trash. Let's give it a shot. So we got the book out, put the first tire on the ground, packed that tire out, put another one down, then another one down. Pretty soon we had an entire structure. We involved volunteers, and we involved some of the local neighborhood kids who were kind of hanging around because we were building a park as well. And everybody loved it, right? We all thought it was a blast. Who thinks using a sledgehammer for 8 or 10 hours a day is a blast? Well, we did. And so as we were building the campus, we saw that there were a lot of lessons to be taught while building the campus. There was a lot of subject matter that you could draw out of the construction process, especially math, right? There's a lot of math in construction.
Yeah.
So what we started doing was integrating the math because we finally did build the school, and we needed subject matter that was better than the, rote memorization based state mandated curriculum. And so we were like, okay, instead of doing abstract math, why don't we do the math to build a ventilated stove for a family in the village, right? They started using their geometry classes to measure out what was needed for the stove. And then in art class, instead of doing something that would go on the refrigerator and get thrown away, we were they're modeling with clay the stove itself. Then in budget class, I started doing the budget for the stove. Then we turned that into water tanks because there's a lot of math and science, a lot of the STEM concepts in water tanks and compost latrines and houses and arches and domes. So we could see as we were building that this was a great medium to engage students and, turn school into fun. Because I think our students really enjoy taking what they've learned in the classroom and doing something with it.
Yeah, I think I love that. I'm excited to get more into that good feeling stuff, but I kind of want to set up the problem because I bet you got to Guatemala and you were like, this place needs help. Tell me about what it's like there and how it's different and what you saw and what kind of pulled at your heart in Guatemala.
So when you join the Peace Corps takes you and puts you in a small village in the middle of nowhere. They give you some training. They set you up with a family to teaches you the kind of the local customs, but then you're kind of on your own. And I was, middle class. And what I ended up finding was that the people there were kids. First of all, what I saw were kids doing work during the school day. They were the little girls were carrying water on their heads, and they were 9 years old during the school hours. And the boys were carrying firewood and but it also goes back and forth. Boys carry firewood, and so people were working to basically get by, and they were spending all day doing it, kind of scavenging, because there's really not a middle class there, and so people have to sort of scavenge to get by, and it was tough. And so we saw that and we were like, let's help.
So amazing. And tell us a little bit about this school too. I was telling you when we talked that I have a pretty great life. It sounds like even you going there, I bet you've been through a lot of struggles. I bet even trying to help them, you've been through a lot of struggles. I bet your life is really hard, but I was telling you, I'm jealous of you because I bet you've experienced a lot of things that have been valuable. And I even think about this. I have a 2-year-old son, and I'm like, man, I think it'd be cool for my 2-year-old son to go to that school, learn how to build buildings out of trash, even see Guatemalan children and see what it's like for them. I think those experiences are super valuable. But what are you seeing as you teach these kids in these schools, as you bring them in, seeing the light get into their face about, oh, this is cool, I'm learning something? And why do you think construction, working with your hands, could really resonate with you? I think one thing about why people are depressed in this country is because we don't work with our hands anymore. There's something to that. Do you agree?
I could not agree more. We built the school and we got our first students in, and we had a teacher standing in front of the students. And I looked at that and kind of felt the trauma from my school days of sitting in a desk and listening and trying to memorize. We were like, we're in a position to make this more interesting and more fun. And so I'll tell you a little story about one of the times we went out to build something. So there's Comalapa, which is, 50, 60,000 people, small rural village kind of in the middle of nowhere. But then there's little villages surrounding Comalapa, and they even get less resources. Right. They have less access to the very basics. So we chose one of those villages. And then our students for social studies class, they did these surveys where they went from house to house and figured out what families don't have in this village. Then they went back to the classroom and they mapped out the whole town, came up with a plan for us to go from house to house, building stoves and water tanks and compost latrines and retaining walls. So we went back and we actually built like 57 stoves and 38 water tanks and a couple of retaining walls, a couple of compost latrines. And so whenever all that was finished, when our students were getting back on the bus to go back home, the people in the village were so happy and so ecstatic about everything that had happened. They were actually throwing rose petals at the feet of the students as they were getting back on the bus, right? So not a dry eye, right? Everybody was ecstatic. And can you imagine what that does for the self-esteem of a student, right? To like be honored by your community, to feel valuable, to be excited about what you're doing, like that went a long way. And then we've been doing it ever since. That was like 2017 or 2018. And we've been doing it ever since because they love it. Of course they do.
There's something really special about building physical things, about home. I know I had texted this to you. A school similar, but like I bet these children start to feel like they go to that school and that becomes part of their home. And then you're helping them figure out how to build their own home. And there's just something really special and tangible and tactile about like giving someone a physical building to live in, to sleep in, to learn in. I think it's really special. I mean, but I do want to talk about what it takes to build a building out of waste, because I've seen all these pictures on your website. I'm going to try to work with you probably after recording this to get some of those pictures into this recording so that I can overlay them. But you build walls out of tires, fill them up with insulative stuff. Bottles are in there too. Let's talk a little bit about the logistics of building out of waste.
Yeah. Well, so when you're in Guatemala, you notice that there is no system of trash management, right? There is no truck driving around. Well, actually, there actually is now. I saw one the last time I was there. However, the truck takes some of the trash and goes and throws it in a ravine. So there's no responsible way to deal with any of the trash, and that truck does not make it to most people's houses, right? And so you look around, if you're a builder, you look around and you're like, all right, what are we going to do with all this trash? Because I kind of, can't stand seeing all the trash all over the place, and there's no way to do anything about it. And so, you stop by the, like a little family owned shop and they've got 15 tires sitting outside, and you go up to the owner and you go, hey, you mind if we take these tires off your hand? And, you're doing the guy a favor in a way, because otherwise he would have to pay somebody to get rid of them. Then you've got 15, and then you do that every single day. Then you end up with 5,000 tires on your site. You dig a trench, you dig a footer, and you throw them on the ground. You dig all the dirt out, most of which we did by hand because there weren't excavators, especially when we started. There are some now, but yeah. And then, you hire some local folks and you throw the dirt in the tire. Whenever we were starting, we were packing the tires too much, which kind of made the walls unsteady. Right. And so, something we learned about that and the logistics of that was we put all the tires up, 11 courses, and then we had to tear them all back down because once we got 11 courses high, then they started to get unstable. But yeah, now at our school, the students are bringing trash as part of their tuition, right? So they bring a trash bottle, and that's how we have 1,000 trash bottles, or what they call eco bricks. And then we do Ubuntu blocks as well, because they bring their plastic wrappers. So we've kind of worked with the community to gather all of this trash, to bring it onto our site, and then we redistribute it into the projects that make sense.
Yeah, is a lot of this stuff that I'm sure, because I've seen this kind of construction out there since I've been alive and know it existed before I was born. But where did you learn a lot of this stuff, and have you seen it modeled in other similar places, and are you trying to replicate it elsewhere?
Yeah, well, so Earthship Biotecture, as far as I can tell, they're the people that really got this going. There's a
Yeah.
show called Garbage Warrior about Michael Reynolds, and there's this little area out on the mesa in Taos, and you drive out there, and then all of a sudden you see these extraordinary buildings. And then so they invited us out there and said, hey, you want to come take a look at what we're doing? We can give you some pointers. We went out there multiple times. Their crew was really cool and said, we'll show you some of what we've been doing for a long time now. And that kind of got us, going. And then from there, it's a collection of books. Right? There's books about how to do finishes, about how to do lime finishes. There's books about how to do cob. You really sort of piece it together from the information that's out there. And our builder, Adam Howland, is extraordinary, right? He can see it, right? He can see the trash. He can see the buildings that he wants to make out of them. And then we start experimenting. Engineers, architects, builders have been our volunteer base, in addition to school teachers and every imaginable person. But all these people from all over the world have jumped in and been like, I got an idea. I've got an idea. And when you're doing it with trash, you need ideas. You need people. You need people to throw in to the mix and be like, this would work better if you do it this way. And so been a lot of trial and error. I think mostly error.
But that seems like the best way to learn. That's a theme of my podcast too, is you got to fail to get better. And that's the same thing with constructive criticism. You have to listen to hard truths that you don't like to hear, and you have to screw up in order to get better. But I think it's something I'm going to probably a couple times throughout this podcast encourage people to volunteer with you. Maybe I've got to do it one day. I've got to come out to Guatemala, because I'm just thinking about this. I've been maybe going about this podcast focusing on the wrong audience, because I'm like realizing maybe there's going to be some real solutions to the worldwide industry of construction that come out of a place like Guatemala, where you're a little bit more creative and willing to fail and trying things that aren't quite as accepted by the smart people in the first world countries that have all these processes and procedures. And I bet you're learning a lot in that process of, like, you get to fail a lot and learn from the failure and try something different, and you're not as bound by a bunch of red tape. Do you feel that?
Certainly. We are experts at failure, I would say, because, we're experts at failure, because the whole thing has been, like I said, trial and error. And having never done it before, and not having had a whole lot of examples to work with, we tried. And, like with the cob, you think that you should throw the cob, and then the cob hits, and then it kind of comes off. Well, there's better ways to do it, that somebody in South Africa showed us, which was take the cob in your hand and then gradually apply it. Right, rather than tossing it against the wall. But tossing it against the wall is really fun, make a ball and throw it. But that's actually not the best way to do it. And the Guatemalans were, extraordinary with this, because, they've done a lot of trial and error with what they've been working with around there, and have all kinds of ideas about, maybe if you're going to plaster this, I've been doing this since I was 2. So I can give you a way better idea of how to do this. And so, we failed in places all over the world, and brought all that failure into one space at the Hero School campus, and had a good time failing.
Okay, let's talk about these kids. And I just wonder, I think there's a way. I just imagine when you're teaching these kids how to build stuff, it's kind of a language of empowerment. You're teaching these kids, and that's, I think, why you're calling it a hero school. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're creating heroes who can go out there and build. Talk about this.
Yeah, well, the area needs heroes. It sounds, when we came up with the name, I was like, all right, that's a little bit cheesy. Should we go with it? Because nobody actually wants to call themselves a hero. I don't want to call myself that. They don't want to call themselves that. But collectively, we're doing pretty heroic stuff.
For sure.
If you walk onto our campus and you say, "What is your profession?" to any of our students, the students will immediately say, we're not going to war, but as we suit up, put on our gloves, put on our boots, go out into the community, and there are a lot of people living in a very, tough circumstances without water, without stoves, without compost latrines. And so, we go out into the community and we do it together, and we're doing heroic work and we're excited about it. And yeah.
What are the alumni of this program like? It's been around long enough. Like, are you seeing people grow up and go off and do amazing things?
Well, the idea would be that everybody that graduates from our high school would then join up with our team, and we would all go out into the community together. And what we found is that didn't necessarily happen, because what they're doing is taking the lessons learned at our school, and then some of them are becoming doctors, some of them becoming nurses or policemen or environmentalists, or, they take what they know, what they learned from our school, and then they apply it to other parts of their lives, which is wonderful as well, because it seems like they're going out into those spaces slightly more conscientious than had they not done it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to talk about, because I just assume every time I've tried to do something good, there's resistance. And I'm sure you're facing resistance to trying to help the Guatemalan people. Can you talk about when you face challenges and criticism and you're trying to do something good? How do you just keep at it?
Well, yeah, it's a tough place to live, right? There's not a lot of entertainment at night. People pretty well roll up the carpets at about 8 p.m. The primary resistance is when you tell a whole bunch of people in a place that you're about to build an entire school out of trash. They look at you like, what in the world are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that went from person to person. And fortunately, the campus was a public demonstration. And so every single school that came to visit, or organization or municipal government that came out there, was like, when I heard about this, I thought it was ridiculous. Then now I'm seeing it and it looks awesome, right? And so you can take some of that resistance and work with it, because, people are skeptical, and they should be, right? Because when I heard it, I was skeptical. And then you get a chance to see it, and that resistance turns into enthusiasm.
Absolutely. And I love, too, that it's green. I do want to talk a little bit about sustainability, because not only are you helping these kids in that community, but you're doing it in a way that's sustainable. You're getting rid of trash. You're building these buildings that, from my understanding, can be even better in insulative abilities and even better at long-term sustainability. Talk about that. That seems like double-edged sword in a good way,
Yeah. We are, not the best way to say it, killing a lot of birds with one stone. Yeah. That's not the most environmentally friendly way to say that, but when you put a tire on the ground, and basically, we still use conventional materials to tie all of it together. You still use rebar and cement and gravel and some of the very basics, of course. But the sustainability part of being able to put a tire on the ground, and instead of using cement, using a tire, and therefore you're creating a job, basically, because you're not spending that cement. Then you're also cleaning the environment. Then you're also creating a lesson plan, right? And then you're also doing, showing people all over the world how to do this, and then it kind of spreads out. And then other people have ideas, and then the innovation starts, because, we're not saying this is the final best way to do it. We're going, hey, here's a starting point, and then the world could potentially take it from there, and we all have a better sustainable starting point from which to work.
Man, it's so cool. What's kind of on the horizon for you guys? And actually, I do want to ask you this one, because I think you've already answered it a bunch of ways, but maybe there's more. Over the last 20 years that you've been doing this, how have you changed? What has really affected you in this process personally?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the difference between me now and then is pretty unrecognizable. Right? Because I started off as a builder, and now I'm in the dissertation phase of a doctorate in education, right? So I don't think that I could actually create an entire paragraph, right? I went to an East Texas school. I wasn't particularly good at school. Was really more into sports and construction, stuff like that. School did not capture my attention. And now I'm writing a dissertation, right? Because like, my focus has changed. And so probably my demeanor has changed, where I'm really excited about sitting in front of a computer and thinking and writing and trying to explain all of this out. And also, I'm humbled by the people that I've had the opportunity to do this with. I've met so many extraordinary people from all over the world, and their commitment, their drive, their ideas has humbled me every single day, and I'm grateful to feel that.
I bet too, when you come back to America, in my mind, everybody here, we think our problems are so important and we get all stressed about the things that we're concerned by. And our problems, after talking to someone like you about the last 20 years of your life, I can release some of those problems in my life because I'm just like, they're not that big a deal. I wonder if you have that too. Like, life kind of settles down, like, oh, I've seen some real problem, you know?
Yes, and I have seen some real problems. And, where that takes me is when I'm in traffic and somebody cuts me off, I don't get mad anymore, because that is a manageable problem,
Yeah.
right? Whenever the electricity is cut off or the internet doesn't work for a little while here, we've had weeks of no electricity and no internet and no water. And, a lot of that stuff, like, I don't know, it has made me like kind of choose my battles a little bit differently, and think about the people that are there and what they're facing, and especially the kids, they're having a really tough time. And so, yeah, I choose my battles differently these days, and there's not much that rattles me anymore.
It makes me think of another line of question that I'm just interested, because we're all very concerned here in our first world countries about AI and technology and how much it's going to disrupt the world. And I feel like we're very focused on how technology can help us. I bet you have a perspective about how there's a human element of this that, like, I bet you agree tech is helpful, and I bet you benefit from tech even in Guatemala, and I bet it will continue to help us become more productive, efficient, and make construction better. But there's a human element that I think you're closer to, that you can see, that maybe is more important than AI and technology.
Like, whenever I'm in Guatemala for an extended time and then I come back, that's really the culture shock, right, that I experience. And that is when you're in Comalapa, you do a lot of walking, right? Because the roads aren't that great, and we sometimes have a vehicle, sometimes don't have a vehicle. But when you're walking everywhere, you stop in the road and you say hi to one person after the next. Sometimes, if you're a half a mile from town, it can take 3 hours to get anywhere, because you stop and say, good morning, and how are you doing, and how are your family members? And that's the first person. By the time you've done that 26 times, you feel more connected to people, right? And then whenever I come to the US and I jump in my car and I drive everywhere, there's not, I'm not saying hello to everybody. When I go to a convenience store, I don't stop and have a 25-minute conversation with the attendant at the store. Right. And it's like, and so whenever I'm here, I kind of miss that human connection, that person to person. That's like, and it seems kind of like, in Guatemala, whenever I've been in the States for a while and I go back to Guatemala, I can feel slightly frustrated with how inefficient it is to be so friendly to so many people throughout the day. It takes forever to get anything done. Sometimes you'd like to get like a handful of nails at the hardware store, but it takes 45 minutes because they're asking you about yourself. They genuinely want to know how you're doing, what you think, how's it going, how's the school. And then I'm like standing there slightly uncomfortable, like I got to get back to work. But then I remember, we're humans. We're in this together. We're talking. We're figuring it out. And so, it's funny how that change happens.
And it really highlights when I'm sitting here in most modern day, like, let's say I'm at a construction conference in the heart of San Francisco in a hotel, and I'm talking to a group of people. When you're in a situation like that, everyone you talk to, they're looking at their watch, they're looking over your shoulder, like, who am I going to talk to next? They don't really want to talk to you. This is the theme that I see in modern American community culture, is like, we're all impatient for every conversation we're in. And I'm just like, this is sad. Let's actually try to get to know the person in front of me. And I have to tell myself this because it's contagious. It's like Americans, we're just all contagiously impatient to listen to each other, and we don't want to get to know each other. And then we're all lonely. And it's like, why are we lonely? And I'm like, maybe because we don't care to get to know each other. And we're just driving from place to place, ignoring each other. So yeah, let's get into what's next for Long Way Home. How can I help encourage people to get involved if they're interested?
Yeah, what's next is really exciting, right? Because we took, that long to build this campus, like we've really settled into getting to know the community to a lot of depth, right? We understand how the structures work. We understand how the materials work. And now we have a really broad base in the town of people who would like to support what we're doing. We've made a lot of partnerships, like we work with Engineers Without Borders. They do, because we have access to the villages and the people trust us. The Engineers Without Borders team from Minnesota, they work with us to have access to those villages, and they bring a water project to these small villages and provide water for the first time. We also work with Terra Firma Floors and build 12 floors per month. We work with WATA, which is Water Access to All People, and distribute water filters and Might. And I could continue dropping all of these names. So that's part of like where we're headed, is now that we have access, other organizations who have resources that would like to use our school and our organization to get to people in need without having to spend 20 years and, how many thousands of dollars to have access. We're in a really good space to make that available, to make that situation available to other organizations. We also are ready for more volunteers, like kind of like after COVID. Before COVID, we had 8 or 9 volunteers in our volunteer house on a regular basis. Now we might have 1, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I would like to, remind people that or let people know that our space is available. We're taking volunteers. We still need help. We still need ideas, right? And so really, what is the culmination? Where is all this headed is what I'm most excited about, is because we've been writing lesson plans at our school, we can now share those lesson plans with the public schools. And so that means that they're going to use our lesson plans, and together we're going to go out into the, and we're going to go out into the town, and all of the thousands of people that are living without stoves and water tanks. Well, we're going to team up with the public schools. And instead of us being a couple of hundred people doing this, we're going to get into the thousands of people working together to take, to help the people that are living in extreme poverty. And that is like, can you imagine that swarm of people in public schools, students who are sitting there kind of bored, and we all go out into this area together and we're all working together. Like, I cannot tell you how excited I am to unite the clans.
Yes, 100%. I'm excited for you. I'm so glad I met you, and I'm excited to try to point people. Let's get like more volunteers than you've ever had. I don't really know. It is interesting that people during COVID, they probably started to think I can't go anywhere, and then they forgot like, oh, there's opportunities to go volunteer places to serve the world. And we need to remember that as Americans. COVID's over. Let's go serve other countries. And Guatemala seems like a great place to try to start and help Matt with his creating awesome schools for people, teaching kids construction skills and making them heroes in their community. Thanks for coming on, Matt. Let's do this again. Let's check in. Maybe I'm going to be bugging you, but maybe in 6 months or a year, we can do a check-in, and I'll keep encouraging people to reach out to you. And I'll provide in the show notes some links, and like I said, I'll bring some pictures so you guys can see what he's talking about too. Thanks for coming. Anything else you want to say, Matt? Like, I know lwhome.org, correct, is
Sure.
one place you can go to find Matt and what he's doing. What else do you want to point people to?
Well, I was going to say lwhomegreen.org. is a great resource for people because all of the buildings that we've done, all the stoves, water tanks, we created profiles. So, some of the profiles have 250 pictures, and they have blueprints, and they have project descriptions, and they have animated videos. So what we did, because we found it difficult to find resources while we were figuring this all out, we documented the entire process. We wanted to make it easier for people from all over the world to replicate this. The other thing that I would say is that Guatemala is not far, right? It's a 2-hour flight from Miami. And then once you get to the Guatemala airport, we're about 2 hours away from that. So yeah, we're accessible, and it's not that expensive to fly to Guatemala. And thank you for this opportunity to share all of this.
Appreciate you, Matt. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Let me stop this.